Tonight on Tower Talks, the Texas Senate passes a series of 4 bills aimed at tightening bail measures. Learn about the bills appearing on your November ballot. Many states around the country allow taxpayer money to be used to pay for private schools. Will Texas be the next state to begin doing that? Learn about the status of the school voucher debate in Texas. Next, Elon Musk's Doge demands federal workers to share their work progress on email. We'll take a look at that initiative and the Trump administration's response. All of this coming up on Tower Talks. Good evening and welcome to Tower Talks, the show where we take a closer look at stories affecting Texans, Austinites, and students right here at UT Austin. I'm Abby Saenz, and tonight we have an expert panel lined up for you to talk about the state of the media. But before we get into that, Associate Producer Justin Dowd spoke with broadcast journalism professor Dr. Kate West about the mental health challenges that professional journalists face. Let's take a look.
Can you start off by just explaining some of the challenges facing those in media and in journalism?
I wouldn't say it's anything new per se. Journalists are asked to do a lot and to work a lot of hours and to often cover people's worst days. And while it's part of the job, we're also expected to just continue on and to keep working and to listen to these stories and process it ourselves and then come back the next day ready to take on whatever else may come your way. And in doing so, we don't really get a whole lot of downtime to process what has taken place, to really think about how it's impacting ourselves, because we're often focused on how we're going to craft our story, how we're going to relay that message to the public. The Gen Z students who are graduating and going into the workplace are not willing to put up with what is taking place within the newsrooms and are letting managers know we need mental health days. We need to be able to have time off. I'm not okay with coming back in after having a really rough day and being able to just go back and do this again. We're at a point now where news managers are finally starting to listen and are willing to give those mental health days. Whereas before, one, you would have never asked for that. And two, if you said you needed that, it could be looked as a sign of weakness, like you weren't able to handle that story or you're not able to go out and do this. So we're not going to give you these kind of stories. Someone else is going to have them.
Journalism and media is always undergoing transformation. While journalism has always remained important, the state of modern media is quite different from newsrooms of the past. When we're back from the break, we'll explore these changes and challenges that come with it. We'll be speaking with a panel of experts who bring years of experience in journalism and media education. Tower Talks will be right back. Welcome back to Tower Talks. Our expert panel tonight includes Robert Quigley, Professor in Practice and Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the School of Journalism and Media. Professor Quigley is also a former reporter for the Austin American-Statesman and started UTJ School's The Drag, a podcasting production house. Dr. Mary Angela Bach, Associate Journalism Professor and a former journalist with an interest in photojournalism practice. Dr. Bach has written several books, and her work can be found in many scholarly publications. Christy Hoppe, Adjunct Professor for the School of Journalism and Media and former Austin Bureau Chief for the Dallas Morning News. She has spent her career covering state politics and the Texas government. And John Schwartz, Journalism Professor and Associate Director for the Global Sustainability Leadership Institute. Professor Schwartz has worked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other publications where he's reported on science and technology. Before we dive into our first topic, to familiarize our audience, could we go down the line and have each of you share a brief introductions about yourself?
Yes, hi Abby, I'm Robert Quigley. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm a professor who teaches our basic freshman digital journalism class that's required for all students, and then I teach a podcasting class for seniors, and I teach a kind of middle level class that's called editing techniques. That's a newspaper print editing.
I teach some concept courses about how news works within society. So I teach a course in visual media and the news. I teach another course on gender and the news. And I also teach some courses and seminars in our PhD program.
I teach a course that is currently pairing students with newsrooms across the state, covering the legislature for those publications, writing stories that appear there and are assigned by editors, and helping bring those community interests to bear at the legislature. Before that, I was a longtime reporter for the Dallas Morning News, eventually becoming bureau chief and covering national and state politics.
And I came to UT about 4 years ago after 40 years in professional journalism, and what I'm teaching this semester is a course on covering the environment, which is really about writing about science, writing about climate change, taking on those issues. I teach a course for sustainability minor students in sustainability in the news, the role of news in getting the word out, and I've also got a graduate course in called Reporting Texas that I'm working on.
Thank you for those introductions. Journalism has always been an evolving field, but the past few decades have brought rapid changes, from the decline of print to the rise of digital media, social platforms, and new storytelling formats. Journalists today are navigating a landscape that looks vastly different from when many of our panelists entered the industry. As professors and experienced professionals, we'll explore how they've seen journalism transform and what they think today's aspiring journalists need to know to succeed in this shifting environment. So starting with a very broad and simple question, from the perspective of journalism professors teaching the next generation of journalists, why is journalism important? And we can start with you, Professor Quigley.
It's very important because without it, everything's public relations or marketing. And we need to know, be able to at least be able to seek the truth, an objective truth. And I think that it's, to be able to make decisions as members of society, we need to know good, verifiable information. It's more important than it's ever been, but it's always been really important. So, and the reason I'm saying it's more important than it's ever been is just there's so many different ways that people are consuming information that there needs to be a way to cut through it.
And I agree with everything that Professor Quigley said. I'm going to add that we are essential to the functioning of democracy. There's a reason that the press is really the only profession that is listed in the Constitution and explained in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. And it's because journalism is necessary for keeping an eye on what's happening so that the public can participate as voters and run the place. We're supposed to run the place, and we can't do it without accurate information.
Right now, so many people get their information from digital and social media, but the difference with the journalists and what we're trying to train the next generation to know is to ask questions, to have both sides, to have even more multiple sides than that, to look at the history, to notice the facts, to report what the basic truth, as far as we can tell, of what's happening. And if you're not doing that, you're just a commentator, and that's what a lot of is driving the news that people are seeing are just comments. And we need to teach this next generation to be the differentiate and let people know reliable information so they can make those decisions.
And as part of that, I don't think it's any surprise that we're in sort of truth-challenged times, and so we're training reporters to help guide people through that, and to recognize when they're being lied to and how to counter that. It's always been an important skill. Now it's become crucial.
Thank you all for that insight. Now, for our next question, how has journalism changed since you entered the field, and what changes have surprised you the most?
I don't look that old, but when I started in journalism, they were still cutting and pasting newspapers together, like you'd maybe seen an old movie or something like that, and they were getting the news over something that slowly typed it out, that kind of thing. So to go from that to where we are today was a big change. I happened to have a front row seat to it because I was at the Austin American-Statesman. I was there mostly as an editor, and when I was there, it was changing so fast, and obviously, the internet became more serious as far as how people were dealing with it in newsrooms around the early 2000s. I was named the internet editor in 2007 at the Statesman, and was basically in charge of helping change culture and make it a more digital newsroom. And so I set about that, and it just hasn't slowed down. I mean, every year we have major changes, and I'm teaching this required digital journalism class, so I have to keep changing my class. I have to keep adding stuff and changing things about techniques and tools, and of course the latest one being AI and how we're dealing with that. But it just keeps changing, which I find exciting, and I like teaching students how to be adaptable to meet the challenges.
I think what's interesting today, and the biggest impact of what's going on between social media and the internet, and the fact that Americans spend almost every waking hour with some form of media, and to borrow from the movie title, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. When I started in news, and I've been both a broadcast reporter, a regular newspaper reporter, a radio reporter, but when I started, you had some time between the time that you went to the story, covered the story, and then the story was either published or aired. When I was a broadcast reporter, there was sometimes a couple of hours in the afternoon when I would write my story, think about it, share the script with an editor. They would look it over. There was some digestion time. Now I would have been expected to go live and start tweeting about that story the very, very minute that any information became available to me. So there's no time to think about what we're doing. It just goes very, very quickly. And that means also for the audience, just a deluge of information that is hard to process.
When I was working in a newsroom, we had close to 400 people. And that newsroom, as newsrooms all across America, are down to maybe 80. And you don't know what you don't know because there's just not enough eyes and ears out there to cover it. Like Mary was saying, it's like a ever-moving, quicker assembly line, and we're all just Amazon package movers sometimes, and there's not enough time for reflection. Fortunately, they are carving out longer narrative stories that I think are and I think we are moving towards a more visual, more audio type of news coverage where a lot of people listen to the news as opposed to read it now. So the media is continuing to shift under our feet, and we're running as fast as we can.
I like to say that when I started out, journalism was typing, and my job was making paragraphs at the paragraph factory. And over time, I was drawn into having to learn how to do video, making social media an important part of what I was doing, getting the word out. And so at one point I was the head of the New York Times Climate Twitter account. So I wasn't just writing about stuff I thought was fun. I was actually representing the news in a completely different medium. And at different points when the Supreme Court would come down with the big decisions at the end of the term, I would sit in the graphic staff and work up these big graphics that would have the words of the decision, big decisions that I had pulled out, and audio recordings that they were plugging in, and interpretation that I was typing on the fly. And it was, none of these things would have existed when I started. All of them were journalism.
Thank you for sharing that intel. And for Professor Bach, so how has the role of photojournalists evolved alongside print journalists? And do you ever think newsrooms get the importance of photojournalism wrong?
Okay. There. Over time, as Professor Schwartz was just talking about, he's learned video along the way. So far more journalists are being asked to do it all. And the people who worked as photojournalists in the late 20th century as still photographers have many of them, if not all of them, have been asked to also learn video skills along the way. But an awful lot of reporters who started and thought that they're only going to be writers, they know that they need to they're usually being asked to shoot some video, some clips, take a picture, do something for social media. So everybody needs a certain level of some of these basic skills, whether they're visual, writing, headline writing, knowing the difference between a social media post and an actual a written full story. And everybody now really needs to have all of those skills. As far as the second question, how have newsrooms misunderstood photojournalism over time? Historically, photojournalists have been kind of thought of as the second kids, and sometimes historically have been brought in on stories after the stories have almost been completely written. And we'll be working on an investigation for 2 months, and then just before it's supposed to go to print, oh, hey, could you go shoot some people, in poverty, or could you please go shoot some photographs about addiction? And so there's a problem. I call it logocentrism, an elevation of words, and the sense that the pictures are not important. I think that's changing over time, tremendously. You don't post something to social media anymore without a photograph or a picture or an image. People in media know that you need a compelling visual to pull people to your site, pull people to your post. So I think that is changing. I also think that as more people who started in the business thinking that they were only going to write and had to learn how to make a picture are learning to appreciate what a good image is, and also the extra layer of ethics that has to come with creating visuals.
Absolutely. I know a photo. Oh.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add that
go ahead.
when I was in my internship, I went to the photo staff and I said, I was a reporter on my internship in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I said, here's my photo assignment. They go, do you have to shoot it today? We have to shoot it today? And I said, yeah, I was assigned it just 2 days ago. And the photographer handed me his camera and he said, go shoot it. And I said, well, I don't know how to work this. He goes, well, you're tacking this on at the last minute, so quality doesn't matter. And I actually remember that so well, like all the way through my career. Like, yeah, you need to think about this as part of the story, not just as a side. So I'm glad you said that.
Thank you both for sharing. I know a photo definitely speaks words itself. So moving on, this question is going to be open to the panel. What are the biggest differences in how newsrooms operate today compared to when you started, and what does that mean for students now?
Wow, there's the immediacy of it's the big one. as Mary was saying, like, we used to have some time to think about our stories, and we used to think TV was the more immediate, medium. Now they're all immediate, and so newspapers and magazines, like, everybody has to know how to, like, move quickly. So there's that part of it. Then there's the other part of, like, the benefits of the internet, which would be like using deep data to tell better stories, being able to dig through records much faster, being able to make connections through data to tell really meaningful stories. So, knowing how to code and be able to do something different with your presentation, all those things, on top of like 100 other things, have become different and very important today.
It's just all moving so fast. We're drinking from a fire hose, and I think right now newsrooms everywhere are scrambling to try and figure out some kind of model that will attract readers. We're competing against thousands of outlets where people get and compilation. The Apple News is where a huge number of readers get their news, and that's so the idea that a newsroom is in its own. I guess what I'm saying is that newsrooms are trying to pick what is the best thing that will serve their readers. Sometimes it's local news coverage because nobody else is doing local news coverage, but those people in that city. Nobody from Apple News is sitting at the city council meeting or going to the school board, and those are decisions that greatly affect most people. And so it's right now perhaps a losing battle for newsrooms to gain readers and to keep readers, but they continue to look for ways that they can serve their community.
And I think Christy made the point earlier that the newsrooms are smaller, and so people are having to do a lot more and deal with a lot more there. It's harder to be able to specialize in a beat because you've got to cover more things and help each other out. So that's put a lot of pressure on news gathering.
Just from a sensory perspective, they're quiet now. And I think that's really interesting. There's far more reporters working with headphones, using their own cell phone, using email to collect information before maybe they have to go out and shoot a story, but it's quiet. And in the 90s, when I was working in TV news, a newsroom sounded like phones ringing, constant phones, police scanners, people shouting, people yelling at each other, having conversations, plenty of profanity, but the telephones. And now, it's not necessary that way. People can collect the information, and part of the reason also is that people are working not necessarily in a newsroom. They're far more scattered. People are working remotely. And COVID, the pandemic, pushed even more news workers out of the newsroom into remote kinds of situations, for better and for worse.
And this next question is for Professor Hoppy. After covering the Texas legislature for so long, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in how political journalism is practiced?
Well, especially among the Republican parties, there's been such a growing distrust of legacy media. And that at this point, there's a large feeling that you don't need mainstream media, that you have newsletters, you have outlets, you have YouTube channels, you have podcasts, that you can work around what is considered legacy media. So you don't have to confront some of the questions that you don't want to answer. Are way so politicians now are picking their media, and it's not always legacy media that will ask the hard questions. The other thing is that a lot of press secretaries won't even take your phone calls now. They'll only answer you in an email, and they want to see a list of your questions first. So there's no relationship, there's no follow-up questions, there's no way to gauge through somebody's voice or what is actually happening, or ask that important follow-up question. There is, and that goes to the mistrust of the media, which is if I write out the answer, then you can't misquote me. So I think at this point, people are siloed in their politics, and that reflects in how they take their media, and they feel like that there's either the liberal media or there's the conservative media, and that just as our politics are polarized, so is our news choices.
Thank you for sharing that. And now moving on to our second topic, the digital age has transformed journalism in ways that were once unimaginable. Social media now dictates how news spreads. Misinformation is harder to combat, and AI is reshaping content creation. Meanwhile, the 24/7 news cycle demands constant coverage, often at the expenses of journalists' wellness. We'll take a look at what these challenges are and how journalists can navigate them. So with our first question, how has journalism changed the way journalists do their jobs? Has it been more of a help or hindrance?
You're saying social media?
Yes.
Yeah. Social media is like the game right now. I mean, if you ask my freshman students in the room how many of them get their news primarily through TikTok, it's the most of the class, and then the rest are Instagram, right? And these are journalism students. So, I don't think we can just hope and wish and cajole them to go to our home site or to our 6 o'clock news. I think we need to meet them where they are. And so the way I teach journalism is almost platform agnostic, in that it doesn't matter where you're posting it. Here's what you need to know. Here's how you report something accurately. Here's how you follow good journalistic ethics. Here's how you get to the truth. Here's how you do a good interview. And then whatever the platform is, they'll be ready for it and able to adapt and adjust. And I believe that we could be part of the fire hose that Christy's talking about. We could be showing people this is something you can trust. This is something you can believe in. It may be down to an individual journalist who doesn't necessarily have to work for a media company that's a legacy media company, but somebody who does follow our ethics and our foundations is a journalist. And so I'm just a believer that we just need everybody to understand how to get verifiable, good, trustworthy, accurate, fair information.
That's brilliant. The whole platform agnosticism. It's absolutely brilliant. But I think that we have to discuss the way that social media and the internet have decimated the economics of the news business and shifted the advertising that people used to rely on in order to be able to fund good journalism. Newspapers used to get about 40% of their revenue from classified ads. They lost that in the 90s with Craigslist. Then as more and more news organizations were forced to and embraced, they did not want to, they often embraced the internet and social media. They want to adapt, but the advertising dollars that come from internet advertising, those dollars is pennies on the dollar. And so there's not enough money to fund the kind of journalism that we need in terms of paying somebody to go sit at city council until midnight, 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning, when most of the decisions actually finally get made, or go to some of those committee meetings about the water department or the school board. That is not easy to dissect what is going on. It is hard work, and people will be able to eat at the end of the week when they do that hard work. And there's the economic ramifications of the internet and then / social media are something that we are all still really trying to figure out.
I think that elected officials, politicians, businesses, I think they all know that there are fewer eyes on them, that they are less likely to get caught with their hand in a cookie jar. And but what we're seeing is that I agree. Platform agnostic is a brilliant term and true. And we're seeing more and more newsrooms go to nonprofit, totally web-based. And Texas Tribune is an excellent example, but there are many others. There's the Fort Worth Report and El Paso. All of them are New Orleans. They all have digital platforms now that hopefully get that local news that your taxes are going to go up, or your garbage isn't going to get collected, or that your kid isn't going to have any kind of a music program at their school. All these things that really matter to people, and eventually, I guess we're kind of hoping they come home to want to look at that as they become part of their community.
Now moving on to Professor Swartz. So how has science journalism changed in the face of growing misinformation and polarization around scientific issues?
Well, it's tough when there are people, there are industries that really tried to hack the media and figure out what are the ways that the media works, and then figure out how to abuse that system. And so from the 50s and 60s on, various industries would hire scientists or sponsor scientists, and those scientists would say, for example, the jury is still out on whether tobacco is dangerous to your health. And they continued to say that even when it became painfully obvious that if you smoked you'd die, that you were likely to. But the scientists at the industry-sponsored Tobacco Institute were out there to say, jury's still out, the science isn't clear, these actions, or there are problems with smoking, certainly, but the reforms that people are saying they want would be too expensive, and they would put a lot of human tobacco farmers out of business. They were all working for the industry. And journalists, unfortunately, for too long, worked on the attitude that you need to be balanced and you need to provide the other side. And so they had invented the other side and had hired people to lie in the guise of well-intended intelligent scientists. And those well-intended intelligent-sounding scientists then lied, and the reporters would dutifully write down the other side. And it really helped delay the sort of the resolution of tobacco, and understanding that we needed to find ways to get fewer people to smoke, whatever it took, that we were killing the country. I covered the tobacco wars at the Washington Post, and I talked to those scientists, and I called the Tobacco Institute, and years later, I'm at the New York Times. I become a climate change reporter, and what do I find but organizations of intelligent-sounding and austere scientists who say, the jury is still out, this hasn't been proved, and the things that people want to do, even if you're right, are a terrible idea and will hurt the economy. And so not only was it the same playbook, but in many cases they were the same tobacco experts that I talked to 25 and 30 years before, who had just found a new gig. And so science journalism, what's happened in science journalism that's good is that we learned a lot. And we learned that you have to do the research, you have to talk to the scientists, and if somebody is lying, you don't need to quote them. That there is such a thing as false balance, and you don't have to provide false balance. There are plenty of controversies around climate change that deserve all sides being represented. What's the role of natural gas in the grid? What's the role of nuclear power in the grid? These are actual conflicts that we can talk about, and we want to go to every possible side to determine where the truth lies and help people make their own decisions. But I don't have to call the Heartland Institute to ask them whether climate change is real. that has been proved. Is it real? Yeah, I can talk to you for our full hour on how we know that. And then I can spend another hour after the cameras go off talking about how we know that it's human caused. So there's no valid scientific reason. And so that leads us to an understanding that we have to sort of understand what people do, fight the disinformation, and then apply those lessons to other types of disinformation in other areas. Vaccines.
Speaking of changes, and this question is open to the panel, how AI has been a huge technological development these past few years. Now, do you see AI as a tool that can benefit journalists, or does it pose more of a threat to the industry?
So I teach a AI and journalism class in the summer. I forgot to mention that at the top of this. And I've been working with a group of students for about 2 years on like testing out AI as a journalistic tool. So I have some thoughts on this, and I would say that generally speaking, it's not very good at like generating journalism. In other words, if you tried to get it to write a journalistic story, even if you provide all the facts, all the quotes, everything, it struggles. Like it's better at writing like essay style. It doesn't know our style or its structure, but it certainly can't do things like make critical choices or follow ethics in a way that like a human would, and those kinds of things. So it's really not good for that. Nobody should be using it for that, and I don't think many are, and those who have been called out, and it's really embarrassing. However, I do think AI can be a very valuable tool in other ways. I have a friend who works for Hearst Newspapers, which owns now the Austin American-Statesman and a couple other Texas papers, and he's working on AI projects there, and he built a tool that allows them to basically take the recordings of those water board meetings that we were talking about that we have to be able to get to and we can't, right? It takes those recordings, transcribes the audio from it, searches through it to see if there's something newsworthy, and then alerts a journalist in the newsroom saying, hey, there's something you should look at in this water board meeting. And so I think tools like that can be like extremely useful, and I do like the direction of the industry right now, which has been to not be totally scared of the tools, but also not embrace it to do things that would be unethical or kind of dumb. And so I'm relatively optimistic about where we are now. Where AI is going, I don't know, and if I knew that, I'd be rich, but it's getting really smart really fast, and so I won't bet against this causing like disruptions in newsrooms as far as employees go down in the future, but for now it's a tool, and anybody who's using it otherwise is not knowing what they're doing.
I'm certainly not as smart about AI and how it applies and can apply to newsrooms, but I remember how enthusiastic we were about this new tool named the internet that would really help us get our news out, and I feel the same way with AI, that newsrooms are basically indigenous people watching their colonizers come in and saying, oh, they're going to help us make crops, and when in fact what they're going to do is take you over.
And I guess my point, my answer to that when a student asks about that issue would be, it's happening whether journalists want it to or not, right. And that was true of the internet too. It's like we can't just say, well, this isn't good for us, so we're not going to do anything with it. I think when you do that, you miss out on Craigslist, which crushed us, right? And so I get what you're saying. I do. I'm not saying, I would go back to the 80s in my childhood with no internet. That was fantastic, kids. It really was. But it is happening. And so I feel like, as journalists and as journalism students, you got to grab the high bar. You got to make sure you know what you're doing so that you don't get washed over.
And I am more afraid about the fact that everybody can create content now, and they're not all nice people. And I am far more concerned about AI in the hands of people who want to generate misinformation, disinformation, scare people, and create things that drown out journalistic voices. We are at a point now where being able to type a good sentence, being able to record a soundbite, being able to edit a good video story are not necessarily the only things that journalists do. The thing that sets us apart are our devotion to transparency, accuracy, ethics, understanding democracy, understanding what the public needs, and caring about that. That's what sets us apart from the average schmo who wants to put up a video story on that might be harmful or untrue.
Now, speaking of all of these changes, do you think multimedia skills should be required for all journalists today, or is there still room for specialization?
Well, I'm teaching to all our students. I think specialization is important. I think we need science writers, and we need government reporters, and we need food writers, and everything else. I think we should be specialized still. But I also think that as far as beats go, but I think that the more multi-platform you are as a journalist today, the more marketable you are, and the more valuable you are to your own company or organization. So I don't think it's a good time to say, well, I'm just throw the typewriter towards me, I'm good to go.
What he said.
Well, thank you all for the interesting discussion so far. When we come back, our panel will discuss how they handle the future generation of journalists and what students should expect. Tower Talks will be right back. Welcome back to Tower Talks for our final panel topic, preparing the next generation of journalists. As the journalism industry continues to evolve, so do the skills and experiences needed to succeed in the field. Now we'll explore section will focus on the future for our journalism students. So moving on to our first question of this discussion, what challenges do you think today's journalism students will face that previous generations didn't?
That's a big question again, Abby. I would say that we're just facing a time where things just keep changing, and a student coming out of college might work in a job that doesn't even exist right now, and so how do you prepare for something that doesn't exist, and tools that have yet to be invented, and distribution platforms that are changing, and all those things? Adaptability. That's it. You know, we teach them critical thinking. We teach them to be adaptable. We teach them how to do all the things that make for a good journalist, all the ethical and kind of foundational things that we do. But if they have those things, I think it's the world's their oyster. They can go take it.
It really is no longer about the technological skills. Everybody needs a basic core foundation in the technological skills. Our students are going to need, and they're going to be able to adapt if they have an ethical understanding, if they have an understanding of where journalism fits into the democracy, and if they also understand epistemology, which is the study of what is the truth, and how do we come back with, how do we know something is true? How do we know what a fact is? How do we provide people with an understanding of what evidence is and what we should expect from our leaders in terms of when they speak, what kind of evidence ought they offer to us when they make a claim. And we need to help the public sort through the wheat from the chaff. And as long as we can train our students to do that, the technology, just keep it coming.
All of us started in our professions before there was an internet. And we all adopted and adapted to whatever came our way. We learned graphics. We learned to take pictures. We learned to transmit and blog and do all of those things. Put first drafts up on X and Twitter. I mean, so I have faith that the next generation, the students who are coming through now, will adjust and learn and do all the things that we can't even foresee. But at the same time, the very basic thing of asking an important question, of making sure that your facts are right, of making sure you know the history of an issue so that you can put it into a context. That is something that will apply to any job you go into, and I don't even care if it's journalism. It will, writing a complete and grammatically understandable it's a sentence that is something that will behoove you whether you go into law, or whether you go into accounting, or whether you go into journalism.
I'm just going to follow up on that, because being able to write a simple declarative sentence that gets the point across is a superpower. And if you can do that, and we don't have computers doing that well yet, if you can do that, you can carry that into any platform, because you're going to have to write before you talk on a screen. And you can take that out there, and as Christy was saying, into other professions. A lawyer who can write, like gold. A journalist who spends years in the business and then goes into public relations. Many of my friends went into public relations. And they get there and somebody says, yeah, we're going to need this written in memo form. Let's get a committee on it. And my friend, the former journalist, said, give me an hour.
Yes.
Because he's used to writing on deadline. And he went out and he came back and it was cleanly written. They said, how did you do that? These skills are very portable. A lot of my students are going to law school, and I applaud them for it. And but the idea is we're teaching them the thing that is going to carry them just about anywhere.
Thank you all for sharing. And our next two questions are going to be for Professor Quigley. So starting off with our first one, what are some non-traditional journalism careers that students might not typically consider?
Yeah, I mean, most of our students, I think, I don't have the facts in front of me, but most of our students that are journalism majors end up not working in a traditional newsroom. They're doing a variety of communications jobs or even non-communications jobs. I think we're preparing them to be those clear writers, to be able to write a good declarative sentence, but also to critically look through information and figure out what's most important, and then have the skills to share it in a variety of ways. And so, I want our students to all go into journalism. We need them. As a society, we need them, but I'm also fully aware that some students come here, they major in journalism, then they go, you know what, I do want to go to law school, or I want to go work in marketing or PR or whatever it may be. And the good news is we prepare them for any of that. And so, I don't see a lot of our students stuck with no job opportunities when they graduate. It just depends on what they want to do and where they want to live. But it's definitely not something that you would say, oh, everybody's going to work for a newspaper or something like that.
Now, what is your advice to students who might not want to work for a newspaper but still want to tell stories?
My advice for a student who wants to tell stories is go through this full program as if you're going to work for a newspaper, a news magazine, or a TV station or whatever. Learn the whole process, because it'll make you stronger, and it's an experience that not many other students get. And so to go through college and learn how to be a journalist will serve you well, even if it just makes you a better news consumer, which is super important right now. But it could also just make you a better photographer during family holidays. So I'm a believer that all the things we teach are valuable, and not just in careers but also in life.
Thank you. And now, Professor Shorts, we're all taught that we typically have to start in these smaller markets once we graduate. As someone who has worked for these big papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, how should students go about breaking into these national markets?
Well, the whole thing about finding jobs in journalism is finding the doors that are open. If the Austin American-Statesman had been willing to hire me, I would have gone, but they didn't want me, and I applied at the Dallas Times-Herald too, and I had a 5-minute meeting with an editor who said, "Thanks for coming in. We don't have anything." I hadn't told him that I'd planned. I'd actually lied and said I was coming in for other things. I'd like to come in, and then he said, "Yeah, thanks. We don't have anything." And that was my entire career at the Dallas Times-Herald. I'm still here, and they're gone. But my point is that you go out and you find the jobs that are there. My first job at a big national media organization was at Newsweek. I didn't walk in the front door at Newsweek. I came in a side door to a little thing called Newsweek on campus that had a staff of less than a dozen people that did stories about colleges. And because I'd been editor of the Daily Texan, I was able to write stories for them about college life. And then traveled the country for them. After a year, I made my way into the main Newsweek. After 7 years, I heard about a science writing job at the Washington Post. I wasn't a science writer. I didn't have a science background, but I talked my way into the place, and I studied a lot. And so this flexibility that we've all been talking about is what gets you from place to place. But I really missed not getting a start at a smaller publication where I could have learned the skills that I needed before I got to national publications. I really had some very bad days and nights because of my inexperience when I got there.
It still hurts to make big mistakes in a small place, so I've been there.
I'm
It's not
sure,
as big.
but it's not published national.
Not as national.
Yeah.
Although I did have one mistake go out in the AP wire I tell my students about, and it became national.
Okay.
We don't have time. Sorry.
No worries. Now moving on to our final question. What advice do you have for journalism students who may feel discouraged about job prospects or the future of the industry?
You're especially here at UT, you're at a place where there's huge opportunity, right? And here's one right here, Abby sitting here doing a TV telecast, and not every college has that privilege to be able to do that. You need to grab it, and you need to have an attitude of I'm going to get the story, and I'm going to get this job, and I'm going to make this happen. And when I was on committees that hired people at the Austin American-Statesman, I was often way more impressed by a student who just showed a determination than a student who had the great resume or whatever. So, be persistent. Don't feel like it can't be done. Push for what you want.
Absolutely. Push for what you want. Make sure that you are doing excellent work and start to develop your own voice and start to develop an understanding of what it is that you want to tell stories about. There are people who have started blogs that eventually become businesses and eventually become publications because they did their research and they kept at it. And so there's a lot of different ways. There's side doors, there's main doors, and there's new doors. And our students, with the skills that they have, as long as they are pushing and making sure that they are centered on excellence, they'll be okay. They'll be fine.
I think the students are walking into doors with skills that newsrooms want, regardless of whether they're virtual or print or web or whatever, because they can crunch data, they can do a podcast, they can put together a visual to go with their stories, they can do graphics. These are things that newsrooms are craving, and when you have a set of skills that they don't have in their newsroom, especially smaller newsrooms, they are anxious to see someone who's enthusiastic, who has the skill set to write that sentence, to ask that question, to gather news, to compile it, to put it into a logistic and a logical form, and also can do a graph with it. They love that, and so I think there are jobs out there, and there are jobs that we can't even foresee out there, and I think and I hope they'll do really well.
And I've got little to add to any of that, except that if you want to write, you write. and you do a lot of it, and you find gigs. I was freelancing all over the place when I was at UT, just because I had so much I wanted to say. I was impossible. And rather than talk people's ear off, I would try to pitch stories, and then I'd also talk people's ears off because I'm just impossible. But but write and write and write and write and build that collection of clips that shows somebody that you're ready, that they're not going to have to do a lot of training with you, that you're going to turn in, again, if we're talking about newspapers, you're going to turn in copy that's clean. It's going to be on time. And all of those things get you ready for journalism jobs or any other job, but it's not waiting to do it. It's doing it.
Thank you all for coming on tonight, and thank you so much for all of the help that you give our students here at the university. It truly means a lot.
Thanks for having us.
After the break, reporter Kai Fong brings us a look at Texas politics. Tower Talks will be right back. Welcome back to Tower Talks. It's time to check in again on the Texas State Capitol and the 89th legislative session. Reporter Kai Fong joins us now to share some political updates.
The state of Texas could soon be launching a new school voucher program that funds private school tuition for select students with public funds. On Thursday, Republican Representative Brad Buckley introduced House Bill 3 in the Texas House of Representatives. That bill will give private school students scholarships amounting to 85% of the per-student funding their public school peers receive. It follows a similar bill that was passed in the Texas Senate earlier this month. However, according to the Texas Tribune, there are differences in the specifics of the bills, such as the amount of money allocated per student and the admissions requirements for the program. The House bill would see each participating student receive more money than provided under the Senate bill. Despite the differing details, Texas Republicans in both chambers and the governor's mansion are largely in favor of a voucher program. In the House, the opposition to HB 3 is being led by Senate Democratic State Representative James Tallarico. Tallarico is worried that wealthy families will take advantage of the program because there's not a cap on income for participants of the program. Although the bill does specify that children from lower income families and/or those with disabilities will be given preference for admission. According to KVUE, Opposition to voucher programs has also come from teachers' unions, and some parents who are worried about how the $1 billion price tag for the vouchers will affect public school funding. However, Representative Buckley, the author of HB 3, intends for funding for the voucher program to be tied directly to public school funding. He also introduced another bill to increase public school funding by $220 per student, although critics argue that amount is insufficient to meet student needs. The Texas Senate passed a series of bills that aim to tighten restrictions on people on trial for violent crimes. The series consists of 4 bills passed on February 19th and 20th. Violent crimes consist of murder, felony sex crimes, aggravated assault, robbery, or kidnapping. Senate Joint Resolution 5, presented by Joan Hoffman, would allow judges to deny bail for people convicted of violent crimes. Senate Bill 9 would expand the list of offenses for which defendants are not eligible for low-cost bonds. Senate Bill 40 would restrict local governments from giving public money to nonprofits that help cover bail costs. Finally, Senate Joint Resolution 1 would require judges to deny bail to undocumented immigrants with a felony charge. If SJR 1 and 5 are passed by the House, they will appear on balance this November. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, under the leadership of Elon Musk, has been working to, quote, make the federal government more efficient, end quote. To this end, the Office of Personnel Management has sent out emails to federal employees requesting that they submit a report detailing their work from the past week, with a stipulation that they provide 5 examples of tasks completed, excluding any classified information. In a post on X, Elon Musk further emphasized the seriousness of this initiative, declaring that, quote, failure to respond will be taken as a resignation, end quote. Musk also noted that this action is consistent with the instructions from President Trump, yet the Trump administration announced today that federal employees do not, in fact, have to comply with the directive, and that any emailed responses are entirely voluntary, directly contradicting Musk's X posts and public statements. It remains to be seen how federal employees will react to this pressure, and whether the initiative will ultimately lead to improvements in government efficiency or spark further debates about governance.
Tower Talks will be back next week, bringing you a panel of presidential candidates for UT Austin Student Government. Be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV News on X, formerly Twitter, and at Tower Talks TSTV on Instagram. Check us out at tstvnews.com online and subscribe to our newsletter, Newsroom Notes. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.